7, so we might as well get started. I like to start with a prayer. Dear Lord, thank you for this time together. I pray that you will guide us in our study and that you'll open our hearts to your will. In Christ's name we pray. Amen. Well, this is about racism, and I'm about as white as you can get. I'll just say that right off the bat. Slavery has always been around. Who knows when it started, but I mean, it's been for ancient times. Different tribes would conquer another tribe and take the people as prisoners and turn them into slaves and things like that. So slavery wasn't new, and unfortunately, slavery is still going on today. We call it human trafficking and things like that. So it may be going under a different name, but it's slavery all the same. So what the book is really about is race relations between blacks and whites, and disrupting racism by having friends that don't look like you. And I got to thinking about, in the South, where there was slavery. Of course, there was slavery in the North at the beginning, but in the South, most of those people were Christian. They went to church. How could they enslave another person? And many of them truly believed that God approved of slavery, that it had God's approval, and they were not doing anything wrong. And part of it goes back to all the way back to the story of Noah. Noah had 3 sons, and after they got off the ark, he planted a vineyard and he made some wine, and Noah got drunk and he passed out. Well, his youngest son, Ham, came in and saw his father there all naked and that, and he ran out of the tent and went to go get his brothers. The brothers went in and they backed him with a sheet and covered him up. Well, when Noah came to, he was very angry at Ham, and he cursed him, said that he would always serve the older brothers. So some people, because if you look, that's in Genesis 9. And if you go over to Genesis 10, talks about the sons of Ham. That's Cush, Egypt, Libya, and Canaan. And if you think about it, those are all African tribes. So a lot of people consider that be God's approval of slavery. And then, of course, you go into the New Testament and go into Ephesians. If you have your Bible there, Ephesians 6. Got to get them right. I have about 10 bookmarks in here. Here we go. Okay. And Paul is addressing slaves and masters. So Paul never says to free the slaves. It was a fact of Roman life that the people were slaves. It was just, normal course of things. But the ones who feel that God approved of slavery because of these passages really stop reading. It's like they didn't see the rest of it. Because if Paul goes on to say, masters, behave in the same way towards your slaves and stop using threats. Remember that you and your slaves belong to the same master in heaven who judges everyone by the same standard. So Paul's saying they may be slaves, they may be your slave, but you're to treat them like a fellow Christian. You're to treat and that. And when he talks to Philemon, the whole book of Philemon is basically Paul is writing to a guy on behalf of his slave who had run away. And Paul is telling Philemon to take him back, to forgive him and treat him like a fellow Christian. So even those who, like I said, who thought that the Bible approved of slavery really didn't look very closely. I think they saw kind of what they wanted to see. And the next one, that's Philemon, Galatians 3:28. Don't know if that's the pink bookmark, the red bookmark. Let's see. And I always like this verse. Paul's writing to the Galatians, and he says, let's see, verse 28. Make sure I'm getting this right one here. So there is no difference between Jews and Gentiles, between slaves and free people, between men and women. You are all one in union with Christ Jesus. So we're all one. We're all created in the image of God, and we're all one, and we're to treat everyone as brothers in that. So obviously, slavery is not really treating someone like a brother. And my last passage I want to look at is 1 Corinthians 12, 13. And here Paul is saying, in the same way, all of us, whether Jews or Gentiles, whether slaves or free, have been baptized into the one body by the same Spirit, and we all have been given the one Spirit to drink. So Paul's saying we're all the same. Your circumstances may be different. You may be rich, you may be poor, you may be a slave. I think they realized they couldn't force people to free their slaves, because oftentimes the slave owner was not a Christian. So Paul's writing to how you should behave in whatever situation that you find yourself in. And so that brings us to our book. It's written by two people in ministry, one black and one white. And the first chapter really kind of opened my eyes too, because I know there's still racism and that, but I didn't really realize how prevalent it was. And if you look on page 15 there, they've taken just one day, they Googled it and looked for racial incidents. And that's what they found there. One in Pittsburgh, Gainesville, Atmore, Boston, and Houston, Texas. So they're north and south, they're all over, and said this was just on one day. Well, I tried Googling too, and I didn't quite get a list like that. I Googled my birthday, November 4th, 2019. And the main thing on that day was there were a bunch of racial incidents at Syracuse University. And that's not someplace where you would necessarily expect. I mean, people always think there's no prejudice in the North, but that's not true. That's not true. So over a period of 2 weeks, there were 12 cases of racist and anti-Semitic graffiti over the school. And I went to then another website, and it says between January 25th, 2019 to August 6th, 2020, there were at least 29 incidents involving race or religion. So what the writers are pointing out is racism isn't in the past. Slavery may be in the past, at least for most people. Jim Crow is in the past. It's not legal anymore. But racism is still here. It's going on every day, and it's not in the past, but it's now. So if you want to go to the end of that chapter, there's some questions I thought we might answer on page 23. And when I was looking at the first one there, it says, when you think about Christians, do you think racism is a front burner issue for them or a back burner issue? And whether it is for you. Well, it's definitely been a back burner issue for me. I knew it existed, but it didn't really affect me. And I don't, because of the sheltered life that I live, I don't see much of this going on except on the news. That's the only place I really ever see it. So I really have not given enough attention to this issue. Any other opinions or anything? Any other comments?
Well, I think it's, we have the issue of racism, which, as you said, is prevalent, and we're just not really, aware of it. And then compounded on top of that, now I think we have this tremendous political divide in the country. So it's almost like something that's going to have to be a front burner issue.
Yes, I think it needs to be dealt with. Sometimes I think it's not dealt with because people are afraid to say things. They're afraid they're going to be called racist or to talk about things as they'll be misunderstood. And I think that when you can't communicate and you can't talk about it, it's really hard to solve it, to solve the problem. And I think that's beginning to happen. And then they want to know if you've ever experienced or observed a racially charged incident. And I'll have to say, no, I can't say that I have, other than, like I said, on the news. I have lived a very sheltered life. So I really have never seen that.
I haven't haven't dealt with it on a daily basis as a front burner issue, but I have dealt with it and been exposed to particularly the results and the healings by African Americans, particularly when I ran a digital storytelling program. Part of that program in the beginning was to have what's called a story circle. So as we began to develop our stories, we would each go around and give some overview about the story that we wanted to develop. And my rule for that was, we're in this room, the doors closed, what happens in this room stays in this room. And I have been exposed to some pretty ugly stories. And so in trying to help those people tell their stories, what I tried to do was let them tell their story in a way that did not mention names, but tried to share the story that had unfolded or was unfolding. And it's a sensitive thing. Also, as you're talking, I remember one time I was in charge of the overall media thing for the university. And at that time we had a lot of student assistants. And I can't remember if it was Louis Farrakhan or somebody like that who was coming to address the students, the Black students actually. And so my students were responsible for making sure all the equipment worked and the auditorium was right. And they actually banned any white students from coming into that situation. And that kind of upset me because I'm there to provide them a service. I'm there for them to have freedom of speech. And they're telling me that I can't send any white students or myself into that meeting. And I thought that was a little bit counterproductive. So well, anyway, I don't want to talk too much. It is a complex issue. Very.
Well, it really is. And I think we have a tendency to self-segregate too. I mean, not just whites, but blacks also. And I think that does not help the issue of trying to solve the differences between us. Like you say, if you can't go in and listen to their stories, how do you know what needs to be done and that sort of thing?
Well, in that situation, couldn't, but I've been part of, through the years, like several different situations where people did share their stories. Most recently, a few years ago, for the Regional Disciple Women's Retreat. And our keynote speaker was Crystal Williams, who is the regional minister for Tennessee. And she's a Black minister. And she set up a couple of sessions. The participants were at most of the Disciple Women's retreats, at least the ones that I've been to. It's about half Black, half white participation. And so we spent a whole evening one night at the retreat where people shared their stories. And it was pretty powerful experiences. One in particular, one of the women who works in a manufacturing plant talked about how, and this is in current times, this is now, she had coworkers that wouldn't touch anything that she had touched because of her race. And that story in particular really stood out.
Mm.
And I, in my own experience, my first job out of college was working in an inner city program to help kids get ready for going to work, getting jobs, their first jobs, and some career thinking and that kind of stuff. And so the kids we worked with were all Black, and the staff was about half Black, half white. And there were some things that happened that I was on the other end. I was the one being ostracized because I was white. I was the one, a couple of us were looked upon as not being competent because we were white. And that really opened my eyes to, or helped to, it's been an ongoing process for me. But it helped me to understand more about what life has been like. You know, the institutional racism that a lot of us grew up with, as far as segregated schools and segregated movie theaters and, you know, and that kind of thing, that has gone away. But the racist behaviors,
Yeah, they still
yeah.
still
I have
exist.
you know, the protests earlier, you know, last year, it really helped to broaden my view about what's still happening nowadays.
Mhm. I think that's part of what this book is. This book is two people telling their stories, and they bring other people's stories into that they're aware of, and that's just what this is. And if you hear about other people and that, I think you become, you know, to care about them and stuff like that. And so it's just it needs to become, I guess, a front burner issue. I would say my views on racism, racial reconciliation, this is question 3, reconciliation and racial justice. They're not set, they're always changing. Unfortunately, I'll have to say that for the most part, I don't think about it much, or hadn't until I started doing this. It just wasn't something I really thought about a whole lot. And the next question too, about having a friend that doesn't look like you. Well, Bernie doesn't look like me, but I know that's not what they mean. I'm not adverse to that, but I've never really had the opportunity to have that happen. I'm not a person to go out of my way to meet people and that. So I've never really had that opportunity.
I think it also, it comes down to the opportunity. It's where I grew up, I was so used to everyone speaking a, you know, not the kids I played with, but all the grandparents would speak another language from what I knew. It was a very different setting, and where I am now is completely different and much more isolated. So it opportunity is definitely a huge part of it.
So what I'd like to do next is skip chapter 2. We're going to come back to that. But since we're an all-white group, I thought we would start with the white chapter, which is chapter 3 by the white author. And reading his beginning thing, I mean, that was so my life, except for the sports figures. I'm not into that. But when he was a little boy, he just said it's only Black people he saw were on TV playing baseball. And I know Keith, real big into sports, and all of his sports heroes, except for one, were all Black. And so, you know, their posters were all over his room. And that, neither Bernie and I had any problem with that or anything like that. So it just seemed normal because they happened to be the best at what they did. And so those are the ones, you know, the ones that he admired. But anyway, and he was just saying how to have really thought about how they were treated afterwards just never occurred to his mind when he's a young kid. And I don't think that ever really occurred to mine. And I've also thought, you know, that once Jim Crow left, that none of these problems still existed. But obviously that was very naive. So I thought I'd just go off a little bit, kind of get my point of view. I grew up in Midland, Texas. The schools were segregated. The only Black person I had ever met was the nanny for the girl down the street. I never noticed, you know, white-only drinking fountains or any of that sort of stuff, but maybe I wasn't in the right part of town. I was just oblivious to it because you didn't really see Black people where you went, they lived in their own part of town. When I get into high school, and like the author points out, not to think about those things is perfectly normal for a white suburban kid. You aren't affected by it, and so you don't really think about it. Well, I went to Robert E. Lee High School. I don't know if they've changed that name yet, but anyway, we were the rebels. And at football games, the Confederate flag went up and down the field, up and down the field, up and down the field. And our fight song was Dixie. And I thought absolutely nothing about that. I had no problem with Black people or anything like that. I didn't think anything of it. I certainly didn't want them to be slaves again or anything like that. So, and you don't really think about the context of those things. It just is just the way it was. After high school, I moved to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, where I discovered that prejudice is not just in the South, it's also in the North.
My grandparents lived in Pittsburgh.
So it's, and that they just have a different way. I think of the South as being more overt and the North as being more subversive, maybe, or whatever. I don't know quite the right thing, but they're pretty much segregated. Anyway, that's where I met Bernie, and his high school was mostly white, but they had, he said, probably about 5 or 6 Black families that went, and it was a small school. It only graduated around 100 kids, so it's not a lot. But anyway, there, and so one of his friends was Black, and I spent time with him all summer, after I met Bernie. So, and these things just seemed fine. I didn't think anything of it. It's just, but I've had really few opportunities to know very many Black people. In fact, it's almost everyone Black that I have ever met or known, I have met through Bernie. He meets a lot of them in sports, and has become good friends with different coaches and things like that. And and we see them in social events occasionally. He had a co-worker who was Black, and now his situation is a little different because he wasn't raised here. He was raised in Mozambique, and he had gone a long roundabout way through Germany and everything else to finally get to the United States. He spoke about 5 languages and that. And so his perspective, I'm sure racist things happened to him. He never talked about it or anything like that, but the United States was so much better than Mozambique. So, he was happy to be here, and I think it was a different perspective. So anyway, I think I've talked enough now. If anyone else wants to comment on, and so race, like I said, just never hardly, unfortunately, I have to say, enter my mind. Our school was desegregated in 1968, my junior year in high school, and they closed down the one Black school in Midland, and half the students went to Lee and half the students went to Midland High. And it all seemed to go real smoothly as far as I could tell. But of course, I kind of live an oblivious life, so there's no telling what all was really going on. I just didn't notice or see it. And we had him in class. In fact, it's one of the best teachers I had was one of the teachers that came from Carver High School, the government teacher. He was just really good. And I really liked him. He was Black. And it just seemed to go real smooth, just like natural. Why hadn't they been going here all along? But I'm sure their perspective was different because they were probably split up from friends. One went to one school, one went to the other. And the ones who were lucky enough to come to be rebels, with the Confederate flag going back and forth and singing Dixie, probably didn't feel quite so lucky. And then we even elected one as class president. He was very very smart, but ended up going to Harvard. So he was, and very outgoing. He made friendships with both with white kids too. Because for the most part, I found that even when it was integrated, white kids ate with white kids. The Black kids ate with Black kids. It's just like self-segregation. And I think part of that's just, you already had your own group of friends, and you're just kind of more comfortable with people you're familiar with. So, And I never went out of my way to make friends with a black student. And that's I regret that, you know. So anyway, any other comments or anything people would like to bring up about whether they grew up in the South or grew up in the North or?
Well, just to your point, Jamie, so high school really hasn't changed because in the lunchroom, you'll see, and this is, of course, Powhatan High School, but you'll see that students, the white students sit with the white students, the black students sit with the black students, and it's by choice. And I think so much of that now we're becoming, as white people, white Americans, we're becoming more aware of the cultural history of the Black perspective and the cultural sensitivity. We're becoming more sensitive to what it is exactly that they have experienced and have kept within themselves. And chapter 2, I think, of this book really dealt with that very well. Just the experiences that they've had, that their parents have had, that they've it's almost in their DNA to know how to behave so as not to get into trouble or be cited or have somebody beat you up just because you're Black. So they live a very different life than we do. And, you know, even though I've seen what I would call some racial altercations, so instigated by maybe comments at school, and those were settled and you know, they were settled in the main office. I mean, I've certainly been witness to them, not really had that happen so much in my classroom. But what I found really interesting, about 3 years ago, teachers really began to come to the forefront and talk more about the experiences and share their experiences at the work table with our group of teachers. So we had whites and Blacks and other teachers of color, but predominantly the Black teachers were beginning to share their stories and their history and why they feel so oppressed still and why they're so angry. And many of them had stories not unlike what was in chapter 2. And when I heard those stories for the first time, I just couldn't believe it was still going on. It was still happening. That, you know, my best friend, who's a Spanish teacher, he got jerked out of his car by a police officer. This was maybe 5-6 years ago. He was just driving down the road. He wasn't doing anything wrong, but he was in a neighborhood going to visit a friend. It was a white neighborhood. He was pulled over. He was stopped, had to get out of his car. They made him lie on the ground. They put him in handcuffs. I mean, it was crazy. I'm like, you got to be kidding. He said, no, that happens. He goes, Linda, that happens to us. And I don't know, it just gave me a whole different aha moment of, this is really, really painful. And it's very, very deep. Those roots are so deep. And yeah, I'm glad we're having discussions now. I'm glad it's in the open. I was sorry to see unlawfulness take place, because I think that's never a positive thing. But maybe when you're at your wit's end, that's the course you finally take. You know, I don't know, but.
Well, I think there is a lot of anger. And now we can go back and talk about chapter 2 too. It really opened my eyes. I had no idea, you know. I mean, I didn't know that people follow them around in stores, you know, afraid they're going to shoplift. You know, I was aware of that, and, you know, driving while Black. But for the most part, didn't really realize how they're all touching. It just really affects their. Now this is something really stupid, and it does not. It may not come out right, but I don't always drive the speed limit, and I notice that and some people drive faster than I do, but I might never pass by a Black person. And I got to thinking, I wonder if they drive the speed limit so the police won't have an excuse, you know, to pull them over. I have no idea, you know, why that seems to be, but it does. It just seems, anyway, that's been my observations. So, but
you know, when I was in elementary school in 5th grade, the school system in Winston-Salem decided to start desegregating. And so what they did was they took the gifted classes from the Black schools and had those students come and be part of the gifted classes in the white schools. So I was in one of the first integrated classrooms, and at the time, I didn't put much meaning to it. But as I thought back on that, I realized I never had any Black teachers in school. And I wonder what happened to the Black teachers at that time in the school system when they started the desegregation. Did those folks lose their jobs?
I don't know. Midland, I can't say they all got jobs, but we had a lot of Black teachers after
Yeah, and I never had any.
desegregate. Like I said, one of my favorite teachers was a Black, taught government. It was,
Yeah.
he's an excellent teacher. But anyway, so I don't know. I had been in the Black school, or I had to go for some tests there, and it looked like a nice facility, but of course, I have no idea if they were equipped or had the stuff that we had, at the white high schools. Probably not. I don't know. I don't know if it's later in the book or the one comment is talking about that Black children don't learn better because they're with whites. They learn better because they have the better books and the better facilities that whites have. And they also, that helps them too, so. But most of it, like I said, it's just like he commented, he said it would have been abnormal really for a kid that time to really think about that sort of stuff. It just never crossed your mind. And of course, here I am in my 60s, and it's just now starting to cross my mind in many ways.
You just kind of introduced, I'm losing thoughts as fast as I'm thinking of them, but another layer, what you mentioned, the facilities they have or the lack of books that they have and so forth. So now we have out and out racism in terms of attitudinal racism, but we have, as a result of the history of all of this stuff, we've had these communities that have been shoved off to the sideline and don't have any resources, so they don't have good schools and they don't have good books. And what it's bringing me to is the current moment that we're in, from what I sort of know and what I read and hear, is we here are collected together by technology. We all have computers, we all have good internet connectivity, fairly good, and not everybody has that. And that all ties back into these things. That's where it becomes really complex to.
Yeah, we're going to get into that a whole lot more in some later chapters, how those sort of things that happened in the past still really influence the present, and that school, that's one of the things they brought up.
I grew up in segregation and was a part of watching integration come in. And, the thought process was not that they're going to come and share our parks or our schools. It was that they were going to come and take them away from us. It was never, I think it was so ingrained that we were never going to not be segregated, that if they came, we would not be able to go because we could not, associate. I mean, I'm going to talk about me particularly, but I'm thinking that was my understanding of the mindset at the time. And I think my high school is about 400, first integrated in 1963 with 2 students. And some years, very quickly, when they folded the school into the Black high school. So no white students went. I mean, that was just kind of it, still segregated. But I can never say the word about regeneration or whatever it is. Regentrification. What it was, I was in Charleston, South Carolina, and it's peninsula. And as people went into the old neighborhoods to revive the old houses that had been tenements and things like that, they pushed the Black population out,
Mhm.
into other neighborhoods, middle-class neighborhoods and so forth. And it just, everything was geographically shifting around. And it's still,
That's still a problem.
a problem, and it's still, it's still very racist there.
It's interesting that you bring that up, and it kind of brings to the history of urban white flight to the suburbs and all that. And that goes back and forth, the people now moving back into the cities, and so it forces different groups to move around. But it caught my attention the other day. I had last Thanksgiving, I played for a family down in Church Hill in their backyard for their Thanksgiving gathering. And they live in these houses that when I moved to Richmond, it was like Beirut, Lebanon. If you had a flat tire, you better keep on driving, and it was all Black. And that's what those homes were owned. Those homes now are selling for $350,000, $450,000. So this guy was on TV and he was talking about the problem they're having and the rising crime, and that this neighborhood had never had any proper sidewalks and narrow alleys and places where people could hide and so forth. And I thought, that's been going on in that neighborhood a whole lot of time.
Long and
Worried about sidewalks, 30 to 100 years ago, so.
I think when they integrated in Midland, I don't know if it made a big difference, but I think they did decide to close down the Black school because I think they figured if they try to get us white kids to the Black school, they'd have problems. And they didn't seem to have too much doing it the other way around. Also, Midland, we more thought of ourselves as Westerners more than Southerners, even though things were segregated. And because my dad was in the oil industry and a lot of people, there were a lot of Yankees there. So it wasn't, my dad was from Pittsburgh, mom from Oklahoma, but my family wasn't unique. There were a lot of, again, in Southern terms, a mixed family, a Southerner and a Yankee. But, and I think that does change the perspective and how things are viewed a little bit because, in that time. And like I said, there may have been problems and they just, right over my head. So, in that, but I thought it was interesting because we'll go back to Tisha. When her parents, of course, are immigrants from Jamaica. And when she got here, they sent her to Catholic school and to a magnet school. So she went to school with other Black kids too, but mostly with whites. So I think she's became very comfortable with white. But, she still speaks about how she still feels kind of like an outsider still, like she doesn't, like an other. She says, even though she, seems to blend in isn't not the word I want, but she fits in real well with and that, and pretty much had the same kind of schooling that probably all of us did, and everything. So, but she still feels not like she quite belongs. And the other one I thought was the one, his friend who, the black surfer,
Mm-hmm.
and how he talked about, he said, no one gave him any problems, but he said everyone stares at him because he is the only Black surfer. And he says it takes a lot of the enjoyment out of stuff, feeling like you're constantly being on display, constantly being watched, not because they have any racist tendencies looking at you. It's just you're unusual. You stand out because there are no other Black surfers around there. And I think that's, can be a problem that's interesting that you just don't think about. You think they're fitting in, but they still look at things from a different perspective than we do.
I think, to me that, like his friend Bob and what that was like, I think about situations where I've been the only woman in a group of all men,
Mm-hmm.
what that has felt like at times. So I can't say what it would feel like to be the only Black in a situation.
It kind of reminds me of Ruth Bader Ginsburg in the movie On the Basis of Sex and what she experienced.
It's being the only woman in the
Being a woman in the law school and not being
hospital and that.
able to job and that type of thing because of that. But even more so, she was a white woman, and just thinking of having the color of your skin differentiate you so much that that's all people see sometimes,
Mhm.
and that they're immediately afraid if you're on a street, walking down a street alone, you know, and talking about having a Black man walking down the street, and people will go to the other side of the street, you know, so they're not walking next to them. And just think how that makes you feel.
I'll have to say though, if I'm walking along the street and I don't care what color the man is, I'm going on the other side of the road.
That's why, you know, there's a lot of people I would walk on the other side of the street.
But anyway, but I know what you're saying, that people do that. It's like I found, it's on page 30 here. She's talking about, this is when she worked at the law firm. She says, in all my work as an attorney, it was like being in the high school debate team all over again. A Black woman engaged in a white man's activity. Again, the sense of otherness was pervasive, like you didn't really, like you were an other, you didn't really belong. The other thing I thought she pointed out when she's on the debate team was some of the compliments she got. You know, like no one expected her to speak well. And when she did, they gave her they said, well, you speak really well. But they didn't get that same compliment to any of the white students because they expected them to speak well. And that's another part of just, and she didn't think necessarily these people were racist or anything like that. It's just the perspective and how we have, how Blacks have been portrayed a lot, you know, in the media and movies and things like that. You get a wrong sense of who they are.
Well, I can remember 20, 25 years ago, some elderly people in our church were very concerned that Jank Road and in that way was, you know, turning, more Blacks were moving in there. And, you know, they expressed concern about Blacks coming to our church and, you know, taking it over. I think one thing is difficult is people that are older than we are that you have loved and you have respected and, you know, you think a lot of, and then, you know, you see these racist tendencies to them, and, you know, it hurts, you know, if it's family members or, you know, family friends and things of this sort. It's
It's like we were talking on Monday. I think it's a generational thing. I never thought of my parents as being racist, but they would not necessarily want to be the only white couple, you know, among a bunch of Blacks, I'm pretty sure. And I know they wouldn't have wanted me to date a Black guy. I think that would have been a bridge too far for them. But otherwise, they didn't really have anything. So, so I have less problems with that, but my children have no problems. And I've been really proud of that they don't see Blacks as any different than us. They don't have any problem with, you know, interracial dating. They don't have any problem in that. So, and I think as the generations go down, it will get better.
I don't know if it will. It certainly hasn't over the thousands and thousands of years that we've had communities. And I think that there are probably a lot of young people who are just as racist, and I think it's where they come from.
Yes, I think so too. But you know, I think Like I was saying, if you think about the movies in the past, blacks were always criminals pretty much or servants, in the movies. That's about the only parts that they could get. Well, as things change and they get more, all of a sudden it doesn't seem odd anymore. It just seems more normal. And I think that's going to help. And I think we do have a lot of problems, but I think we have come a long ways. I don't think we're like we were. Not that we don't have a long ways to go. And people have always been tribal. I mean, and that. So it's not necessarily just on race. It's, tribes, religion, all sorts of other things that people have always fought over. Is that the cat?
I think somebody's
Sounds like somebody's asleep.
What do you think?
Well, I think it also, I find it, when I was working, years ago in tech, and I at one point was the only woman in an all male department, and I was completely comfortable with that, and they were completely comfortable with me. And then like a year later, I transferred into a different division and a different department, and I was in with a group of all women, and that group was so petty and catty and just horrible. And I think sometimes it's just it's a matter of, we have to social with people, we have to get in with people, we have to work with them, we have to actually have the experience of working together. And sometimes you would think, oh, I'll just put her in there with a group of all women her age, everything's going to be perfect. No. So, I think it comes down to the opportunity to, just work together and be around, more time together.
I think that's true. But we still tend to self-segregate, unfortunately, a lot. So, we do have a ways to go. But I think if you have more instances, like the book like this comes out and you see their perspective, a lot of it I just didn't see it, never really thought about, why they would feel that way. But after reading this, I've changed my mind. I think you become more empathetic, and I think that helps move you closer. But I still don't really have any black friends, and I don't really have any place I know to go to get any. So maybe someday I'll have something will come up, but anyway.
What do you think would happen with our church if our new associate minister was a woman and she was black?
I would have no problem with that whatsoever, and I think a whole lot of people wouldn't, but there may be people there who would be uncomfortable with it. I don't know.
I just wanted to ask, being completely ignorant about things like this, I mean, in terms of, I have noticed that, the churches tend to be either everybody is white or everybody is black. And there's a church here that I really am so interested in going to, but I guess I have figured out that it's a, quote unquote black church, but I really would like to go there. And is that, I don't understand. I don't know what I'm trying to say. It's not like I want to say, can I do that? Or is there a reason why that would not be welcomed, or would it be okay? Or what should I do?
They would
I've
probably love for you to
experienced-
come.
Talk with the minister.
Yeah. I think you could. I've often thought a lot of reasons that the church's services are segregated is the style of worship.
That,
In
yeah,
other words, a lot of the black churches with songs and that would just seem like I was in a foreign land. That would Not that it would bother me that they're black, it's just it would be a different, totally different line
Well,
of
see,
worship.
the problem that I'm having is the churches that I go to here that are quote, new or whatever, they have like the electric guitars and the fog machines and things like that. So I know I'm not going to be comfortable with that. I just, I was wondering if I can, if I contacted the minister and said, I would like to attend church here one time to see, would that be considered okay? Or is that just, I don't know, you know what I mean? I don't know. I'm having such a tough time finding a service that I can sit through and say, wow, I really enjoyed that.
Uh-huh.
Because BACC is just so rare and wonderful that I'm trying to recreate it. And of course you can't, but I still would like to have, a service to go to just to experience the.
I would think, especially if you talk to the minister, would probably let you know if she thought there would be any sort of problem with the congregation on that. I think it might be odd for everyone at the beginning, just like if we had a black family that came here, they would stand out because they're the only ones. I think most people would be welcoming. Another reason I think the churches are segregated a lot is because our neighborhoods are. And you tend to go to a church near where you live. And so I think that's another reason, because I think some of the inner city churches are much more integrated than in the
Some of
suburbs.
the evangelical churches are more integrated than mainline Protestant.
Yeah, I thought if I went to Knoxville, that my church experience would be different in a bigger city than if I go to a church here, because as I've told you, the churches that I've gone to here, all of which have been quote white, some of them have been not the minister, but the congregation has been cold, is probably the best way to describe it.
My limited experience in attending black churches, I've always felt welcomed in the black churches that I visited in.
Yeah, I just thought that, it was so difficult for me to go to Bon Air the first time on that Saturday night service and sit in the back row so I could bolt out the door. I can't imagine that I'm going to get the strength and courage to do something like this, but I would love, there's one church here that looks like it has to be well over 100 years old with beautiful stained glass, and I would just love to attend a service there.
I think you need to actually call the minister and see if you can't come and meet with him. Because in my one visit, I worked with someone in my first job. So this was 1971, and he was a black minister as well as, this is in Atlanta, and he was a black minister as well as, worked at the hospital that I worked at. And so he invited me to come to a service. He wanted me to come. So I went with about 3 other friends. And when we got there and went in, he wasn't out yet. He wasn't in the building. He hadn't come from behind. Oh, the cold fish. Everyone was horrified that we were there. People turned around. They were just like, what are these girls doing here? And when he came out and he called out to me from the front of the church and said, oh, I have Barbara visiting with us today and her friends, everyone turned and smiled. It was because they weren't expecting us. They were concerned. We were kind of like crashing their church service. So I think if he could introduce you to someone that would be able to sit with you and introduce you around, that would be your entree. But don't go unannounced. No, it's too much. It's the, and it was a very different service. And my little friend to my right, who is Jewish, and when they started like the praise singing, she was very you could tell she was getting upset. And another woman from the service just came and sat down beside her. So she was a buffer between her and the people that maybe were walking up and down the aisles and praising with their hands, and just making her know it's okay. we're right here with you. You're fine. And
Yeah, I think I would love to go to any church to have someone to go with me. And that's,
yes,
that makes a big difference.
it does. It does.
Probably naive for any of us to think about going to any church, black, white, green, whatever, that nobody knows us, and assume that everybody is going to be perceiving you as the same way. And to be honest with you, the more I learn about people in our own church, some of the things that I say, and Joe referred to in the past, some older people with various ideas and so forth. Politically, in our current now, politically, you stick a dipstick down into our church, you're going to find different kinds of oil.
Well, I would like to see our congregation integrated. Gosh, in the early 90s, when we were living in Chesterfield, we had a interracial couple that lived behind us, and he was from, a first family of Richmond, and in fact, our church is on Hazen, the corner is Hazen. I think his mother had been a Hazen, and because he married her, he got kicked out of the family's business. And then there were all sorts of things. She had lost her sister to cancer. She missed going to church. We invited them to come to our church because our church was so friendly. And the only person that was friendly was Polly.
Right.
Oh, what's their last name?
No, not Polly White, Polly Kraft.
Crafts.
Yeah, Polly Kraft was.
Yeah, she walked across the church. She came from her side over to our side to speak to them and introduce herself.
But I said something to some people afterwards about that, and I said, they'd never come back, and I'm sure they didn't feel welcome. And the response I got was, well, it probably would have been different if it had not been an interracial marriage. If it had just been a black marriage, maybe it would have been more acceptable. I brought that up a couple of times over the years, and nobody I've ever talked to about it remembers them coming. It was, but
And maybe we didn't do
Our
it
experience.
to introduce them to the people
Well,
sitting around us.
Well, I think relative to the book, I haven't read the book. I read a little bit of the beginning of it, but I'm not good with confrontation. I'm not going to be down there banging on monuments and getting in the middle of things. I'm just not. I have a couple neighbors, young couple who moved in, and because of the COVID thing, we have not been able to get together. My only approach is, here's a nice young guy who moved in and doesn't have a dog that's trying to kill me this time. And his lawnmower broke down. I'm trying to coach him how to fix his lawnmower from 25 feet away, because that's when the pandemic is really hitting, and all I can do is be a friend. The other night he called up, and his girlfriend was getting ready for an interview, and they had problems trying to resume for her to go on an interview. And he called or sent me a text message. He said, I really need your help. I had no idea what was coming, but he said, can you print the resume? So we did that, and I took it over to him. But that's like, it's just like I'm taking baby steps to say, I'm glad to have a nice new neighbor.
I think that's a big point of this book, actually, is taking baby steps. Working towards, and they're not, so far in the book, they're not asking you to be confrontational. Yeah. They're asking you to be friends, to actually listen to really listen without interrupting, listen to someone's story, and to empathize with them, and to and see things also, from their point of view. It doesn't going to mean you're always going to agree with them. And I certainly don't think that if you disagree with a Black person, it makes you a racist. I don't think that. I think everyone can have their, have various opinions, but that's what it is basically making new friendships and taking those baby steps that a lot of us, we're still, I guess, crawling. We're not we're not taking really hardly any steps at all. When a Black couple does come, everyone turns around and looks because, well, it's unexpected. So you don't want to make them feel uncomfortable by staring at them, but you also don't want to ignore them and not be friendly. Because I've been to churches where this wasn't anything to do with race, but you go in, you're totally ignored. No one says hi, no one says anything. And Claire, to your point, somewhat, we've lived a lot of different places, and the same denomination is different in different regions of the country.
I mean, that's, oh, wait, my video just, wait, hang on. Oh, there we go. Okay. So yeah, the experience, I've been to different churches in Richmond, with the friends that I had there, to the Methodist and so on. And it was fine. And I always thought to myself, oh, I would go to this church, or, oh, I would go to, and then I came here, and I don't know whether it's when I walk in without a husband, or I don't know what the deal is, but it is very, except for maybe 2 instances, it has not been welcoming at all. And I just, as I said, Knoxville is going to be the next step when this starts opening up again, to try to, even if I have to drive that far, to maybe just go someplace where, again, when I walk in and sit down, people are not staring at me, kind of.
When Bernie and I lived in Delaware, we drove 45 minutes to go to church. Because the churches near us, there were 2 small ones. We went to independent Christian churches at this time. And each church had like 6 people, maybe 8. And Bernie and I are thinking, why don't they join together and be one church? No, they did not get along. So
Had been one at one time.
and that, so we went other places, but anyway, it's it would be very different. I didn't Bernie's work friend talked about, went to Mozambique. He married a local girl in California, and they invited us to their Christmas party. Bernie and I and one other, is it a man or a woman? Now I can't remember. We're the only white ones there. One was a mixed race couple, and then Bernie and I. It was one of the best Christmas parties we ever, we ever went to. It was we had a fabulous time, and Bernie, of course, is comfortable with everybody, so I hear a lot of stories from him. His favorite one on this one. This happened in Richmond. We worked for a company. The workers at the factory wanted to have a basketball team to be in the industrial league, and so Bernie
We
said,
want Bernie in this class.
well, Bernie is out running errands. He's probably home by now. He wasn't home when I went there. He said he might join us. It won't be tonight though. But so he went to the owner, and they did. They got a basketball team together, and they called themselves, what was it? 12 Black Guys and Bernie. So the whole the team was all Black. A lot of them had played college ball, actually. He said they're a really good team, and Bernie loves basketball, so he wanted to play too. So, so it was 12 Black, either 12 or 11 Black Guys and Bernie. But at the end of the season, they won, and so Bernie said that they could go out, get pizza or whatever, and they said no, they'd like to order something at one of the people's places. So he gave them the money to order pizzas and that. And they went over to the guy's house, and they're just talking, having a great time. And then Bernie says, well, it's like 2 or 3 in the morning. He says, I really need to get home. And he said the guys all stood up And he said, so-and-so, you drive that car, I'll ride with him. And they escorted him out of the neighborhood because they were afraid at that time of night, a white guy all by himself might get in trouble. And that, so a couple of them rode in his car, and so someone followed them to give them a ride back to the house, once he got out on the main road. And he was really shocked by that really caught him by surprise, because he doesn't feel any discomfort being in. He doesn't feel discomfort with anybody, actually.
Susan reminded me of a story when we were in graduate school. They were doing, and this actually, I learned later, was a racist kind of thing too. They tore down Fulton Bottom, did a redevelopment housing thing down there. All we knew is that we could get a free garden plot down there. So while they were in the interim period there, you could go have a garden. Our garden was sort of in the center of the foundation of a house and had a fireplace in it and so forth. But our neighbor gardeners were Black and so forth. And I was kind of mixed people down there. We're down there gardening, and all of a sudden somebody goes, "Honky, hey, honky," we're going, oh God, are we going to get shot? And they had a white dog that they had named Honky, and they were calling.
So,
Oh.
but I think that also, that kind of illustrates something I kind of think about, that sometimes we see racist things and things that aren't racist.
Yep.
That are innocent. And there are ones like, she comments a lot on people who say things to her. She says she doesn't think they're racist. She doesn't think they're doing anything. They're just unaware. They just don't understand how that sounds to her, or to a black person. And I think that's
I know I've been guilty of that. Yeah.
so.
I mentioned that some of you were in some other Zoom meeting, and I mentioned having seen Pharrell Williams on the
Yeah.
Foods program.
Yeah.
Coming
I
out.
saw that afterwards.
That really struck me
Mhm.
pretty heavily. But so when we talk about slavery and so forth, we use these words, and of course they're ugly, and we know that. But I had a young black employee, and we were running the television equipment. I mean, the early days of satellite learning and so forth, and a cooperative engineering. But before the School of Engineering at ECU existed, it was like the beginning of that kind of thing. So in this television production studio we have, it's an industry standard to use the language. We would record things, and then we would have to duplicate tapes and send them out to other schools and so forth. And so you have the master and you have the slave unit. Well, I've got this young guy working in there, and he started running that, and all this stuff was referred to as master and slave. And we went through, pardon my language, hell and high water to deal with that a little bit. We had to actually rename some of the equipment, but that's not the industry, at least at that time. That was not the industry thing. But sure, you have those words can really affect someone.
And Wilbur. And
Oh yeah, I had one of the greatest people that ever walked the earth, a black man that was on my staff. He had been around the university for a long time, and I'm not going to mention names, but there was a family, an old Richmond family, that had a house down there and so forth. And he was telling me one day that he remembered he had a friend who worked at that house doing various things, and one of his jobs, they stabled horses. Actually, when we came to VCU, there were horses there on the campus, and this guy's job was to walk the horse, and this had been years before, but it hadn't been too many years. Down there at Stewart Circle was a tobacco field and pasture down there. And so he would walk the horses down to that field, and this owner had her chauffeur follow him to make sure that black man didn't get on her horse. And so Wilbert has told me some stories too. about that stuff.
Yeah, I think it's unfortunate that, because those kind of attitudes are handed down. You know, you're not born with that attitude.
Well, but I also will say, having worked in the horse industry for many years, there is a definite split in the mindset that there are people who own the horses, who have the money to own the horses, and then there are the people who shovel the manure, of which this is where I was. And you know, I loved having that job because there was no other way I would ever be able to be around horses of that caliber. But it is, I mean, that is something I experienced all through the horse industry. I never left my mind who I was, meaning that I was the one who shoveled. You know what I mean?
You were the help.
I was the help. And it's sad, but it's, you know.
I do think things are getting better. But it could be I'm oblivious too, so who knows, but and that. Well, it's after 8. I don't know if we want to end. Unless anyone else has anything else they'd like to add, maybe try to get through the next 3 chapters next Wednesday. And like I said, I have really enjoyed this book. It's opened my eyes to a lot of things that I just wasn't aware, you know, because like when we're with the black people that Bernie knows, they don't bring up race. They don't bring up how they're treated or anything like that. They're just like normal people around us, because probably, well, like she talks about, blacks don't necessarily feel comfortable discussing this stuff with white people because they don't think we'll understand, and that's probably right. But anyway, so.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Jamie.
Yes, Jamie, thank you. And
Thank you all for coming, and hope to see you back next Wednesday. And
Be a test.
no, I'm not going to give a test. I just think it's good to talk about experiences, because everyone has different experiences. They've seen different things, and you know, a lot of you have had a lot more interaction with the Black community than I ever have. And it's interesting hearing your stories, you know, and how things have gone and things like that, because it's not something I am familiar with. So anyway, everyone have a good night.